While on vacation in Mexico, Danny Boulder wanted to immerse himself in the country's culture fully. So that is why he picked off the beaten-track villages and cities to visit, but little did he know that he would find his new best friend during his explorations. Houston native Danny saw a weak stray cat on the side of the road and immediately formed a bond with it. But when he took it back home, the vet immediately called the police behind him. Danny had always been fond of animals, but when his cat passed away from old age, he decided not to get another one. Instead, the young man wanted to focus on traveling, which was hard to do with a pet at home. So with a heavy heart and an empty home, Danny decided to redirect his attention to planning his solo vacation in Mexico. This was his first time in the country, and he wanted to experience the most authentic version of it. With all the arrangements, Danny drove into Mexico and began exploring the small villages around the border. He was immediately captivated by the locals, but it was a weak stray cat that stole his heart. He spotted the kitten on the side of a busy road and noticed how it was all skin and bones. And as Danny leaned in to give it a pet, the poor creature ran up to him, hoping to find food. His heart broke seeing its condition, and Danny immediately picked it up. The kitten seemed desperate for love and food, so Danny forgot all about his plans for the day and went on a mission to find some kibble for the kitten. But as he walked with the small, helpless creature, he noticed that locals began staring at him. They even yelled a few warnings his way, but Danny, unable to understand Spanish, was utterly regarding their meaning. In hindsight, the young man wished he had paid closer attention to the locals and saved himself a world of pain. But as he walked to the store with the kitten, the creature nestled into Danny's arms. It was clear that it felt comfortable with him, which only made the young man's heart melt. Finally, after asking around for hours, he found a pet store where Danny bought food for the kitten. But the poor thing needed more than just a meal to save it. It was clear it needed medical intervention. Danny still had a few more places he wanted to visit in Mexico, but he needed to make a choice with the stray kitten in front of him. He could take a detour and find a local shelter for the kitten or do something drastic. He could take the kitten home with him. But while Danny knew that the latter was the challenging option, he felt like somehow the kitten and he was meant to cross paths, and the two had already bonded to the point that just the idea of saying goodbye to it felt wrong to Danny. So the young man settled to grab a few more bags of cat food and bought some bowls and packed the stray kitten in his car. He knew that the best care for the kitten would be in the United States, so he decided to take the risk of bringing it back home. It was clear that taking care of strays wasn't normal, based on the reaction of the locals, so Danny knew that he was doing the right thing. Unfortunately, he didn't have official paperwork for the cat, but hoped he wouldn't be asked many questions at the border. And he was right. Danny passed every checkpoint smoothly, and when anyone questioned him about the kitten, all he said was that he was traveling the world with his cat, and that was about it. The border guards only whispered a few things in Spanish and let Danny and the kitten pass through. The young man couldn't believe how easy it was to get the kitten into the United States, proving that he and the kitten belonged together. While driving back from the Mexican border to his home, Danny thought more about his travel plans and how he could accomplish them with his new kitten. Of course, the easiest choice would be to leave the small kitten home. But something about that felt wrong to him. The way the two of them had met, and with his recent story about traveling with his cat to the border, Papa Trolldenny decided that the minute he got home, he was going to adopt this kitten officially and do just that. The first thing he needed to accomplish was to call a veterinarian who was trained in creating travel paperwork for pets. After that, Danny wanted to do everything by the book to ensure that he and his kitten could easily travel around the globe. But as he was booking an appointment for her, he realized that he had never named the kitten in all his excitement. And from the top of his head, he picked the name Missy, and as he started calling the sweet kitten by that name, it seemed to fit well with her personality. With the appointment made, all the cat toys, care items bought, and a name for his stray kitten, Danny felt overjoyed. It all worked out quickly and satisfactorily. The skinny kitten promptly adapted to his home and started eating regularly. Though she was still underweight, nevertheless, things were going smoothly with Missy and Danny forming a nice routine. The kitten was slowly gaining weight and looked more confident and comfortable around Danny, But all of this started to shift after a few days back in Houston slowly. Danny noticed that his once cuddly kitten would get episodes of aggression, where she would grab him and bite him for no reason. At first, he had thought that it was normal kitten behavior, but having had cats before, he noticed that Missy tended to bite more ferociously than any other cat he had before, to the point that he would need to wear gloves around her to protect himself. In only a week, Missy's entire personality had changed, and Danny had to practically fight her to put her in the carrier to take her to the vet. While he knew Missy was stressed, getting her properly vaccinated was necessary. Danny also noticed that during the car ride, Missy growled and constantly scratched her carrier. This was completely unexpected, as he had traveled with her from Mexico to Houston, without her ever acting like this. This sudden aggression made Danny think that he had done something wrong. He was glad the veterinarian could see Missy and shed some insight into why she was experiencing such a drastic personality change. And as Danny waited to see him, Missy continued violently thrashing against her carrier. When Danny's name was finally called to see the vet, he was beyond relieved. And after going through the story of how he had found Missy, the veterinarian decided to do a thorough health checkup. He noticed that the veterinarian was relatively quiet while he checked Missy and answered Danny's many questions with vague explanations. But when the young cat owner asked about creating travel papers for the kitten, the vet immediately raised his eyebrows and excused himself. After about 5 minutes, he again entered the exam room and told Danny that he wouldn't advise that he travel anywhere with Missy, as she was in shock and severely malnourished. He prescribed her medication and told him to come back after a month. Danny was completely confused during the interaction, as he had never been denied travel documentation for his pets. It was meant to be a streamlined and straightforward process, but concerned about Missy's well-being, Danny followed the veterinarian's instructions. He returned home and started feeding Missy the medication, but it was easier said than done. The kitten had gotten even more violent since her vet trip and would scratch and bite Danny to the point that he was covered in marks. 3 days later, though, this was about to make sense. It was early morning when Danny heard a sharp and loud knock on his door. The knocking soon turned into persistent banging, startling not only him, but also Missy. Danny opened the door, angry as to who it be, but found 2 serious uniformed police officers staring back at him. They asked him his name and wanted to confirm if he had a kitten in the house. The young man was immediately confused and asked what this was concerning. But the police officers weren't in any mood to answer Danny's questions, so they instead asked if they could search his home for a kitten he had brought to the veterinarian a few days ago. The young man told them there was no point in searching and that he would show them the kitten, whose name was Missy. The cops were surprised that Danny was cooperating, and as they walked in, they suspiciously scanned the area, but found nothing but a few cat toys. They started to wonder if the veterinarian had been wrong, but as soon as they saw Missy, they called for backup. They immediately asked Danny to step away from the kitten and put Missy into their police carrier. Of course, Danny was furious but felt like he couldn't argue with them. And it was only when Missy was placed in the car did they finally tell him the truth. Missy, who Danny thought was a simple stray house cat, is an endangered young Mexican bobcat. The possession of one was illegal in the United States. The veterinarian had immediately called the cops when he had seen Danny bring the bobcat in, and worried that the young man had planned on selling it. Of course, Danny was utterly shocked and heartbroken. He had bonded deeply with Missy, but after hearing that he could go to prison for keeping the bobcat, the young man hesitantly let her go. Missy was moved to a shelter that helped relocate endangered animals. Danny was warned not to bring more animals into the United States without proper paperwork. While the two never reunited, Danny was happy that at least Missy was taken care of by professionals.